Hello and welcome to this very special video. I would call it a throwback video because recently we all know that the X-Men and the Avengers are celebrating their 60th anniversary of existence. Both of the teams that were created by the legends Stan Lee and Jack Kirby back in 1963 in the month of July. 2nd July is the publication date of Avengers #1 and X-Men #1. For me, these two teams hold a very special place because I always loved the superhero teams, starting with the Justice League, because that's just like the A-list of all the superheroes that are there. I was not too fond of the Justice Society of America because of the old school costumes and stuff. Nevertheless, I loved that team. But there was something special about these two teams from Marvel Universe. The fact that the kind of imperfection that we would find within each and every team member that would constitute a very unique combination, a formation of a team that is something quite different, quite exciting, quite interesting when we compare them with their DC counterparts. So in this video, what I'm going to be showing you today is my first ever X-Men comic, which my parents had bought me, and my first ever Avengers comic. And the special thing about them is, first of all, you're going to be seeing the condition they are in, but at the same time, you will also get to know the backstory behind each and every one of them, especially from where did I buy them. Stay tuned. In the year 1987, when I was studying in elementary school, we were out on our summer holidays out of Saudi Arabia, and this was my third year of collecting comics. So my parents would buy me 10 comics every summer, which I had to read for the whole year, and that would be the biggest moment of the year for me and my brother also. Now, what happened was that I had been seeing those ads that were being published in Marvel Comics, and I would come across X-Men, and one of the characters in X-Men was actually introduced to me by a childhood friend of mine whose dad was working here in Jeddah in an international airlines, and he brought for his son a poster. I think it was a Secret Wars poster, I don't recall, but I saw Wolverine in that poster, the guy with the claws, and I didn't even know what his name was. My friend, he said that his name is Wolverine. So up until my teenage years, I would pronounce Wolverine as Wolverine, because we didn't have lots of channels, streaming services, internet. So in 1994, when I landed in New York City for our summer holidays, my parents had booked up this very special summer holiday for us, and that was the time I came across the X-Men animated series, and then I learned that it was Wolverine all along. So anyways, in 1987, my parents bought me my first ever X-Men comic. Which one was it? It was this one, X-Men, The Uncanny X-Men number 212, written by the legendary Chris Claremont. The reason I bought this book was because of, you guessed it, Wolverine. And I was so happy and delighted to see that when I went through the pages, this issue had Wolverine and Sabretooth's, I think, first ever confrontation, face to face, with all the claws coming out, and that just made my day. The special thing about this issue is the fact that it's part of the Mutant Massacre crossover from the 1980s, from Jim Shooter's era. It's one of the best crossovers because it involved a unique combination of characters, starting with the X-Men, and I believe the New Mutants were also involved in this one. Thor was also involved, and I think the Fantastic Four, if I'm not mistaken. Nevertheless, the art, it's not by John Byrne in this issue, rather it's done by Rick Leonardi, but it's one of my favorite comics, which I read again and again, and especially the fight scene between Wolverine and Sabretooth, that just, makes it for me. And there's a beautiful ad of Gumby and Pokey. This is not that issue which I had bought. This is another copy which I had purchased, because the copy which my parents had bought me had gotten completely ripped because of too much moving, shifting, and all these things happening. So I was fortunate enough to get this first print exact same. This is not a reprint, this is the original issue itself. So a lot of memories from the 80s. This was published in 1986. I got this in 1987. And along with this, I had also, my parents bought me X Factor, I think number 10, in which Angel, Warren Worthington, is presumed to be dead. That fatal helicopter crash. So a lot of memories to talk about. Now, the next issue here is the Avengers, my first ever Avengers. Now, keep in mind that I had Iron Man comics, Captain America comics, Hulk comics before it, Thor comics also. But the only team I had, whose comics I had, were the Fantastic Four. And obviously, because Fantastic Four from day one are a team, they never had their individual issues, with the exception of The Thing, which was an experiment in the 1980s, which didn't go along quite a lot. But nevertheless, I did not have the Avengers comic, not a single one, Avengers issue. X-Men, I had started to collect. Along with X-Men, I started to collect X Factor as well. But in 1990, in Jeddah, we went to Middle East Shopping Center. The site is still there, the structure is still there. It's located on the intersection of King Fahad Road, which is commonly known as Shara Sittin or Sittin Street, translated 60th Street or street number 60, and Palestine Street. Back in the day, in the 80s and the 90s, Middle East Shopping Center was a huge thing. And we would be going there because there was Star Markets, and we had to go there for our monthly groceries. And that was the first time I had come across the Saudi version of a newsstand, which would be selling Time, Newsweek, Guardian newspaper, all of these Western publications. But they would also be having comic books. And I was fortunate enough to buy this issue along with an issue of G, both Marvel titles, and I think it was like 7 riyals, maybe not even 10 riyals. So you have this one issue of the Avengers. The special thing about this issue is that the Eternals, Cersei, had become a member. The Avenger, not very much popular, Rage, that's his first appearance in this issue. As you can see from the cover, She-Hulk is also there, Thor is also there, Iron Man is also there. This was the starting point for me for the Avengers as a team. And this one, the surprising bit is that this issue was written by veteran G.I. Joe writer, Wolverine writer, Larry Hama. This copy that you see in my hands is the one issue that is written by Larry Hama. And the art is done by Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan's art, especially for the Avengers, was, I think, in my opinion, a hallmark, if you will, of the 90s Avengers. I just, whenever I have to choose between Steve Epting and Paul Ryan, I will always choose Paul Ryan. For some reason, his artwork always connected with me more than Steve Epting, who would be later on taking up the mantle, of course, after the stint of Bob Harris and Andy Kubert. So that's how my journey began with Marvel's two most popular teams, namely the X-Men and the Avengers. And a surprising fact is that in the 90s, the X-Men were so successful, so huge. There was lots of merchandising. The Avengers had become a second-tier team in the 90s. Even though a lot of good stories were published and stuff, but for some reason X-Men, they had their animated series, they had their Toy Biz line, toy lines coming in. everywhere you looked, it was the X-Men. And I can say for a fact, because in 1994, when I was in the United States, I went to New York, I went to Los Angeles, I went to Florida. In all of these states and cities, I would find X-Men more rather than the Avengers. But the Avengers made a strong comeback at the start of 2000s, and the X-Men then became, they started to go slowly in the background. Today, what the X-Men are, they are not like the team, the popularity that what it used to be. Jonathan Hickman had tried to revive them, and he did a marvelous job in my opinion, but unfortunately his successors have not been able to carry the mantle. Nevertheless, if we are talking about 60-year history of the X-Men, and based on what I have read about the X-Men and the Avengers from my collection that you see at the back, the best time to be an X-Men fan was the 80s especially, and the 90s. The 80s up until the start of the 90s was the Chris Claremont era. Nobody can top that era, frankly. And even the 90s was good. Scott Lobdell, Fabian Nicieza, under the leadership of Bob Harras, produced a lot of great content for the X-Men. Whereas for Avengers, the Avengers were pretty consistent starting from the 60s. They came out with a bang with Kree Skrull War, amazing space opera. And then they kept on bringing up more and more great stories in the 70s, in the 80s. In fact, I recommend reading their crossover, which were happening between the Avengers and the Marvel team-up issues, as well as like issues of Captain America. Some of the best Shield stories are there that have taken place. The 80s, I think, was like a very strong decade for the Avengers, in the sense that you had people like Roger Stern actually writing the Avengers, and then you had, I think, Mark Grunwald also getting involved before he got involved with Captain America, if I'm not mistaken. So, but in the 90s, the Avengers just simply diluted in the way that in the 30th anniversary, Captain America was more in the background. In fact, he was his I think the 90s was a very special time, because Mark Grunwald's run prematurely came to an end due to his untimely death. I think that happened in 94 or 95. But the individual titles of every Avengers member was doing great in those days, if the team titles were not there. By the way, the 90s was a time when, especially during the 30th anniversary, Dane Whitman, Black Knight, had become the member. Cersei was there, Black Widow was there, Hercules was there, and War Machine was there, because War Machine made his first appearance, I think, also in 1994. But as someone like you all who love these superhero characters, it all began with these two comics. I hope you liked this video, and if you did, please make sure to share it. Let me know in your comments if there is something else that you would like to ask me about these issues, or the X-Men, or the Avengers. And I hope to see you soon in my next video. Take care.